Welcome to lesson number 3 of module 4, case study, Brian Rippett, MS patient. I'm your host, John Malanka with The Sacred Plant, and in this lesson, we bring you a special interview with Brian Rippett, a Florida resident and patient of Dr. Stein, who has lived for nearly 20 years with MS and now successfully manages his active, athletic life with both conventional and whole plant cannabis medicine. I know you'll enjoy hearing a different story of MS, one in which cannabis partners with conventional medicine to make it possible for Brian to have a restful sleep so he can wake up and be more active as each day passes and serve as an MS activist in Washington, D.C. Join me as I interview Brian at Dr. Stein's Neurology of Cannabis Clinic in Sarasota, Florida. Welcome back, Brian.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. Let's talk about, you've been diagnosed with MS for about 20 years.
Yes.
For the past 20 years, you have not been using medical cannabis, and it's just recently that you've used medical cannabis.
Yeah, I've been doing it for about 2 years.
Can you share what that diagnosis was like 20 years ago?
The day before I was diagnosed, when I went to the hospital, I was having foot drop. I was dragging my leg. It almost felt like a stroke. And when I went to the hospital, the doctor gave me some tests and said, we think we've found an inoperable brain tumor, which I knew was not good.
Yeah.
But he said, we're not sure. We'd like to do some more tests. So the next day I did an MRI, and that's when they diagnosed me with MS.
Can you talk about thoughts in your mind, fears? Did you have more, I'm assuming you had more fears then than you do now. I mean, now you seem totally in control and confident and say a happy lifestyle.
I was happy because I was told I was going to die the day before. So when you're told you have MS, you're like, great, yeah. Trust me, the doctor looked at me a little crazy that day.
I'm assuming you had a neurologist up in the Boston area.
Yes.
And so you not only, when you moved down here full time, not just being a snowbird, you had to find a whole new medical team. And were you referred to Dr. Stein? Now, how did you find?
I researched because a neurologist is not just. I wanted somebody that was MS specialist, right? And Dr. Stein was MS specialist. And obviously down in Sarasota, there were not a ton of MS specialists. Yeah. And Dr. Stein was one of them. And my doctor up in Boston was Stein, so I just thought it was Kissimmee. So I had to go there.
Easy move, huh?
Yeah.
And so you came down here, and I don't believe Dr. Stein at that time. And how long ago was this?
15 years ago.
15 years ago. So back then, Dr. Stein was not an expert in medical cannabis.
No, he was not.
And so you guys have been together for quite some time.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and then we moved over to Fort Lauderdale for my wife's job, and then we moved back to Sarasota.
And so then when you move back here to Sarasota, you're still seeing Dr. Stein, and then one day he said, hey, here's some new research on cannabis. I'd like to talk to you about this.
Yes. And I had been involved in the getting cannabis legalized in Florida for medical research anyways. So it was just kind of a natural flow.
So had you tried cannabis before with all the studies out there with MS? Had you heard about, GW Pharmaceutical?
I've heard about it for years. In fact, raised my hand when I was first diagnosed.
Pick me, huh?
Yeah, I'm 63, so 50 years ago, it was a couple of people who would smoke marijuana, so I thought I'd give it a shot. So yes, I raised my hand a long time ago, but it was not legal then.
Yeah. What did your wife think when you said, "Hey, I would like to try cannabis"? It sounds like she's been a total supporter.
Oh,
you
yeah.
Need the shots.
My wife was no problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
She was like, whatever you could do to make this either go, do it. Yeah, she's my number one supporter.
So did you find any relief? Did you try it via smoking? And I know you talked about the syringe with the oil, and now you take a capsule at night. Can you talk about the 3 different types of administration that you did or did not use?
I did not. The smoking was 50 years ago, and that's before I was diagnosed.
Okay.
Yeah. When Dr. Stein had introduced me to that, that's when we talked about it and said, let's try the syringe first and see how that works. And I took it 3 times a day.
And you know what formulation that was?
I have no idea. No, I do not. It was indica. The strain was indica, so it was the same strain that I take now, but it was administered differently.
But it did have some THC in it. wasn't
Yes.
it? Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay. But that did not help having to doing it 3 times a day.
It was okay, but it was, again, because it's a medical marijuana.
Yeah.
It's Florida. Everything's cash.
Oh.
So when you go and pay cash at the dispensaries, it's could be a little expensive.
Yeah.
So I thought, let me try something else. Dr. Stein said, "Why don't you try a capsule?"
Yeah.
So I did, and what I found was that, and I did notice this, but I used to, before cannabis, I would shake.
Yeah.
Not bad, but I would shake, and I could shake a lot. And my wife noticed it. And when I started taking the cannabis, I stopped. And I didn't notice I was stopped. My wife was the one that pointed it out. She said, "You don't shake anymore."
And did you ever try vaporization? Because I know a lot of MS patients prefer.
I never tried. But I didn't do that because I used to smoke 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I thought, I don't need any vaporization that even looks like a cigarette.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you just went with the capsules. So the capsules took about a week, and you've been on that ever since.
Yes.
And so it's 10 milligrams of indica.
Yes.
Used for nighttime. It helps us sleep.
Yes.
And you sleep through the night as well?
Yes.
And it's just your nightly
Ritual.
medicine.
Yeah.
I've shared your story quite a few times since you and I spoke. What I've talked about is having diagnosis of MS is not a death sentence, as you've mentioned throughout our conversation, throughout our interview. One, you just did a 50-mile bike ride a few weekends ago. 53.
I ride a bike. I have a recumbent in my condo that is not in my bedroom, and I do 10 miles a day, 5 days a week. In fact, after this interview, I'll probably go home and do 10 miles. I did 10 miles yesterday, and I do it 5 days a week.
Awesome.
Or I will go outside and ride the recumbent. So I'm more active now than I've ever been, and I never used to do that.
No. Thank you for sharing that. I know a lot of people that I've shared your story with that also have MS it's opened their eyes. So thanks for that.
The parting thoughts would be just if you try something that doesn't work, try something else. Yeah. Don't stop. Yeah. Keep going and stay active. I really do believe that being active is what's kept my disease at bay more than anything else.
Welcome back, Dr. Stein.
Thank you.
Welcome back to our Sacred Plant community and the Brain Masterclass family here. We're going to talk about, we're still on the topic of MS. And in this lesson, I wanted to, last lesson I spoke about a patient that I wanted to introduce you to. And I didn't want to uncover it in the last lesson. Well, I'm going to introduce you here. His name is Brian Rippett. He's a patient of Dr. Stein. He's been a patient of Dr. Stein for the past 14, 16 years, I believe.
That's right.
He's had MS for the past 20 years.
I was always impressed by him from the very beginning. Yeah. He came to our clinic when I was doing a lot of multiple sclerosis work. We actually had an MS clinic that included physical therapists and social workers. We would have patients come to our MS clinic. We would sometimes enroll them in treatment trials. We would use conventional therapy. Mm-hmm. We would hook them up with social work, psych, or swallow therapy if they needed it. We did all those things, and Brian and his wife were just a pleasure to see. He had a form of multiple sclerosis initially called exacerbating remitting or relapsing remitting. Okay. And most patients with multiple sclerosis have that type of MS where they get sick and then they get better. But sometimes they don't get all the way better. He then developed a condition called secondarily progressive multiple sclerosis, where he stopped getting better and he got slowly worse over time. So the pattern, the tempo of his illness changed from one of periodic illness to one of slow decline. Sad and challenging, but he rose to the occasion and he amped up his lifestyle choices and started including more things like exercise and becoming very active socially in the MS world, and he's risen above his deficits.
Not only is he active locally, but he's active nationally, and he goes up and speaks on behalf of MS patients, not only here in the U.S. but around the world, up in our country's capital in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And so, great guy. Can you talk about, the causes of MS? What brought Brian to you, and if you can share about that first meeting, which led to where we are today.
The cause of MS is uncertain in Brian and in all patients.
Okay.
We don't know what triggers MS. It's a form of autoimmune disease where your body's own immune cells begin to attack your own nerves in the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. And as a result of that immune attack, the nerves stop working. You can develop stiffness and weakness, which he has. You can develop slurred speech, which he has. And you can develop any host of other problems. Unfortunately, there's no cure for MS, but we can get close to a cure because conventional therapies have allowed us to reduce the number of flare-ups and slow the progression. So we do the best that we can with the weapons we have.
Good.
And now with medical cannabis, we have another weapon in the arsenal against multiple sclerosis.
Yes. Can you talk about MS? And our previous lesson, we spoke about MS. We spoke about GW Pharmaceuticals and their formulation, which is a 1-to-1 ratio, 50-50 THC to CBD, equal amounts of, I think, 2.7 milligrams.
Correct.
And so that's where a lot of the case studies have been around the MS with Sativex from GW Pharmaceutical in the UK. But you tried something different with him because it didn't work with him, with Brian. And can you share why you chose that?
If at first you don't succeed, keep trying.
Yeah.
And with Brian, we tried the 1-to-1 formulation, and although it helps many, many MS patients with stiffness and spasticity, he was not all that helped by that medication. He also had problems with sleep.
Okay.
And we decided to try and attack that symptom so that theoretically, if he sleeps better, he'll do better during the rest of the day, the next day. And that's actually what happened. We were able to successfully treat his insomnia. He had more restful sleep, and he's been more functional during the whole day as a result.
Okay. You mentioned attack sleep. So what do you do when a patient comes in and they have an issue with sleep, depression, anxiety, MS, and another slew of other ailments? And people think, oh, I'm going to take cannabis and I'll be healed. Sometimes sleep is that first domino of the domino effect. You fix this and everything will fall its course. And then, so this is what you found with Brian, right?
And it makes sense to start with something like that because when you use THC, some patients get drowsy or mildly sedated. They may feel not like themselves 100%. And so starting cannabis therapy with THC, usually it's a good rule of thumb to start in the evening when people are home and relaxed.
Okay.
And so since he had daytime and nighttime symptoms, we decided to go with the sleep after that initial trial with the 1-to-1.
So with Brian, not only being under your care for the last 14, 16 years, so you've worked together before cannabis was introduced into his treatment plan. And now in the last couple of years, he's been on cannabis successfully to treat his MS. How has this helped your practice with working with other MS patients?
I love taking care of MS patients. Although I don't do a lot of the intense immunotherapy anymore, which requires a whole nother skill set, I still see MS patients in my cannabis clinic frequently. They respond beautifully to cannabis therapy. And I have a special understanding because I've been working with MS patients since 1981.
Yeah,
that's forever.
With your mentor professor, he specializes in MS, didn't he?
He did. Dr. Rudick specialized in multiple sclerosis. He basically taught me how to care for them, and I've continued to try to hone those skills since then.
Well, thank you for sharing not only your story, but also introducing Brian to us and Brian to our community. And again, if you have any questions about what Dr. Stein and I have discussed here, please submit your questions or attend our live Q&A, and we'll see you there. Thank you, Dr. Stein, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening in on this special lesson. As we've just heard firsthand, it is possible to thrive as an MS patient. Today, an integrative approach that includes medical cannabis is not only saving lives, but making it possible to enjoy life and the joys of movement that many have lost to this neurodegenerative disease. I hope Brian's story ignites you in hope, knowing that you do have an option to natural medicine and a happy, healthy, pain-free life. We are all into this together. Patients, doctors, nurses, family members, and the growing global community of advocates and medical users of the sacred plant. In our next lesson, epilepsy, we will continue our discussion on movement diseases and disorders by delving into the complexities and the treatment of epilepsy.